Welcome to Sleepscape. If you enjoyed this, you can like the video and subscribe for more. If there's a story that you'd like for me to tell, feel free to leave a comment. It helps more than you know. Now, let's get into it. The events connected to the Black Hope horror took place in the Newport subdivision of Crosby, Texas, northeast of Houston. During the late 1970s and early 1980s, families moved into the neighborhood believing they had found quiet suburban homes where they could settle down and raise their children. For Sam and Judith Haney, it felt like the home they had always wanted. For Ben and Jean Williams, it seemed like a peaceful place to start over. But underneath part of the neighborhood, there was something many of the residents didn't know existed. A forgotten cemetery. And according to several of the families who lived there, disturbing things began happening after graves beneath the neighborhood were uncovered. The story would eventually become one of the most well-known paranormal cases ever featured on the television series Unsolved Mysteries. Tonight, we're taking a closer look at the case now known as the Black Hope Horror. By 1982, Sam and Judith Haney had settled comfortably into their home in Newport. Like many homeowners, they eventually decided they wanted to install a swimming pool in the backyard. But before excavation began, something strange happened. According to Sam Haney, an elderly man approached him after noticing preparations for the pool. The man warned Sam not to dig in the yard. Sam later recalled following the man into the backyard where he pointed towards specific areas on the ground and claimed there were graves buried there. At first, Sam didn't know how to react. There were no visible headstones, no cemetery markers, nothing suggesting human remains were buried beneath the property. Still, the warning stayed in the back of his mind. Eventually, Sam decided to see if the man's claims were true. Using a backhoe, he began digging in the backyard. It wasn't long before he hit something beneath the soil. Sam stopped using the machinery and climbed into the excavation site to continue digging by hand. There, beneath compressed pine boards, he discovered what appeared to be the outline of a human skeleton. It quickly became clear that the remains were real. Authorities were immediately contacted. The sheriff's department and county coroner arrived at the Haney property and began an official exhumation. As investigators continued digging, more remains were uncovered. According to reports, many of the bones had become extremely brittle over time. Some reportedly disintegrated when touched. Then, investigators made another disturbing discovery. Inside a second coffin, 2 wedding rings were found on the exposed index finger of one of the skeletons. Judith Haney later described the moment as deeply upsetting. She said it sickened her to think they had accidentally desecrated someone's grave. Wanting to understand what had happened, the Haneys began researching the history of the land beneath their home. Their search eventually led them to a longtime local resident named Jasper Norton. According to Norton, portions of the Newport subdivision had been built on top of an old African American cemetery known as Black Hope Cemetery. Many of the people buried there were former slaves and sharecroppers. The final burial reportedly took place in 1939. Over time, the cemetery had fallen into neglect and much of its history faded from public memory. According to Norton, As many as 60 people may have been buried there in paupers' graves. The remains discovered in the Haney's backyard were later identified as Betty and Charlie Thomas. The couple had died decades earlier during the 1930s. The Haneys ultimately made the decision to rebury Betty and Charlie in their backyard and hoped their spirits would finally be at peace. But according to Judith Haney, that was when strange things inside the home began. According to Judith Haney, one of the first disturbing incidents involved a clock inside the bedroom. One night, the clock suddenly began sparking and emitting a strange blue glow. When Judith checked the clock, she discovered it wasn't plugged in. She later described this as one of the moments that genuinely frightened her. Then came another incident. One evening, Sam was working the night shift while Judith remained home alone. At some point during the night, Judith heard the sliding glass door open. Then she heard what sounded like Sam's voice, saying, "What you doing?" Believing her husband had returned home unexpectedly, Judith went to investigate. But when she checked the house, the sliding glass door was still locked. No one was there. The next morning, another strange event occurred. Judith was getting ready for work when she realized her red shoes had disappeared. She and Sam searched throughout the house but couldn't find them anywhere. Eventually, they walked outside near the graves in the backyard. There, resting side by side on top of the gravesite, were Judith's shoes. Then Sam realized something even stranger. The date happened to be Betty Thomas's birthday. Sam later said it almost felt as though Charlie Thomas had brought his wife a birthday present. As time passed, the Haneys reported additional disturbances. According to Judith, unexplained sounds moved through the house during the night. The atmosphere inside the home slowly changed. Judith later described constantly feeling frightened inside her own house. She said she cried often and became afraid of simply going through her normal daily routine. The Haneys also discovered they were not alone. According to reports, multiple neighbors in the subdivision began reporting strange experiences of their own. Some described lights turning on and off by themselves. Others reported unexplained sounds, water faucets activating unexpectedly, and shadow-like apparitions. For many of the families living there, the neighborhood no longer felt normal. Like the Haneys, Ben and Jean Williams originally believed they had found their ideal suburban home. But according to Jean, she never truly felt comfortable there. She later described having a constant sense that something wasn't right on the property. Even simple things became unusual. Jean said plants refused to grow no matter what she tried. Then the family noticed strange sinkholes forming near a flower bed outside the house. According to the Williams family, the depressions resembled the unmistakable shape of coffins. The holes were repeatedly filled in. But according to the family, they kept returning. The Williamses also began noticing strange markings carved into nearby trees. A longtime resident later explained that the markings had been used years earlier to remember where relatives were buried. The realization deeply disturbed the family. According to the Williamses, paranormal activity inside the home gradually intensified afterward. They reported seeing shadowy figures moving along walls, whispering sounds, and a foul odor that sometimes accompanied the experiences. One afternoon, Jean Williams and her granddaughter went to lie down for a nap. The house was quiet. Then they heard the front door open. A moment later, footsteps began moving through the house. Slowly, room by room, then closer to the bedroom. Believing someone had entered the home, Jean grabbed her revolver. She and her granddaughter searched the house carefully, but every door remained locked. No windows had been opened, and there was no sign anyone had entered the home at all. At the time, Ben and Jean's granddaughter Carly was also living in the home. Carly later described suddenly walking into pockets of freezing cold air during the middle of the summer. She said the atmosphere inside the house constantly felt wrong, as though someone unseen was watching. According to Carly, toilets inside the home would flush on their own. And during those moments, she claimed she could hear what sounded like murmuring voices or conversations within the flowing water. Jean Williams became convinced the activity was connected to the graves beneath the property. She later stated that she believed the family was being tormented because they were living on top of a cemetery. Ben and Jean discussed leaving the home, but financially, they felt trapped. According to Ben, they decided they would stay and try to fight through whatever was happening. Then one night, Ben claimed he experienced something he could never explain. After returning home from work shortly after midnight, Ben walked into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. That was when he allegedly saw two ghostly figures standing nearby. According to Ben, the figures moved backward through the den and then down the hallway toward the bedroom where Jean was sleeping. Ben followed them, but by the time he reached the room, only one figure remained. He later said the figure appeared to be standing near the bed. Acting on instinct, Ben lunged toward it. But the moment he made contact, the figure disappeared. Ben later described feeling a sticky cold sensation pass through his body. According to the Williams family, several immediate family members were later diagnosed with cancer. 3 eventually died from the disease. The family became convinced the property itself was somehow connected to the tragedies surrounding them. As conditions inside the neighborhood continued deteriorating, the Haneys decided to pursue legal action against the developers responsible for the subdivision. The family argued they had unknowingly purchased property built atop cemetery land and believed the developers should have disclosed that information. The case eventually went to trial. The developers denied intentionally withholding information and claimed they had been unaware of the cemetery. In 1987, the jury concluded they did not believe the developers intentionally harmed the Haneys. However, the jury also recommended that the Haneys receive compensation for mental anguish. The Haneys were initially awarded $142,000, but the legal victory did not last. The ruling was eventually overturned. The Haneys appealed multiple times, including bringing the matter before the Supreme Court of Texas. Ultimately, no successful rehearing occurred. The legal battle devastated the family financially. According to Sam Haney, the ordeal eventually resulted in bankruptcy, the loss of their money, and the loss of their home. The Williams family also explored legal options, but according to Jean and Ben Williams, they were told that without definitive proof of graves beneath their property, there was little they could do. Frustrated and desperate, Jean decided to begin digging herself. She reportedly believed that if bodies were found on the property, it would finally prove what the family had been saying all along. But shortly after beginning the excavation, Jean became ill. Her adult daughter, Tina, volunteered to continue digging. According to witnesses present that day, Tina worked for roughly half an hour before suddenly becoming dizzy and weak. She eventually went back inside the house and laid down on the couch. Carly later recalled Tina repeatedly saying she didn't feel right. Then Tina reportedly looked at her mother and said, quote, "Mommy, take care of my baby," unquote. While finally waiting for paramedics to arrive, Jean attempted to keep her daughter conscious. But Tina had suffered a massive heart attack. 2 days later, she died. She was 30 years old. For Jean Williams, the loss was devastating. Jean later became convinced that disturbing another grave had somehow brought tragedy upon the family. Eventually, the Williams family left the neighborhood entirely. They later relocated to Montana before eventually returning to Texas. According to the family, they no longer experienced paranormal disturbances after leaving Black Hope behind. The Black Hope case eventually gained national attention. Ben and Jean Williams later worked with author John Bruce Shoemaker to write a book documenting their experiences titled The Black Hope Horror. According to Shoemaker, the writing process lasted approximately 3.5 years. The book was published in 1991. In 1992, the story was adapted into a made-for-television film titled Grave Secrets: The Legacy of Hilltop Drive. Public reaction to the case has remained deeply divided. Some people view Black Hope as one of the most disturbing alleged hauntings connected to suburban America. Others believe the events were caused by stress, fear, grief, coincidence, suggestion, or misinterpretation. Years later, several newer residents living in the neighborhood reported experiencing nothing unusual at all. To this day, no definitive explanation has ever been found for what the Haneys and Williams families claim to experience. Whether paranormal or psychological, the events connected to Black Hope permanently changed the lives of the families involved. And decades later, the story still remains one of the most unsettling alleged haunting cases ever connected to a quiet American suburb. If you enjoyed tonight's story, subscribe to Sleepscape for more true paranormal encounters, mysteries, and disturbing cases from around the world.